Parker Evans stared at his phone in disbelief as he read the text message from his best friend Marcus for the fifth time. "No excuses this time. You're coming to this dinner party or I'm telling everyone about the San Francisco incident." Parker groaned, dropping his head into his hands. As the 35-year-old CEO of Titan Shipping, one of the largest private logistics companies in the country, he had better things to do than attend some random dinner party. But Marcus knew his weak spots, and the San Francisco incident was definitely one of them. "Fine," Parker texted back, his thumbs stabbing at the screen. "But you owe me. Big time." The response came immediately with an address and time, followed by a string of celebratory emojis that made Parker roll his eyes. He tossed his phone onto his desk and swiveled his chair to face the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan office. The city sprawled below him, a testament to what he'd built over the last decade. Titan Shipping had started as a small freight forwarding company he'd launched with his inheritance and a loan. Now, it handled logistics for Fortune 500 companies across the globe. Parker rarely made time for social engagements these days. What was the point? Every party, every charity gala, every casual get-together inevitably turned into a networking opportunity where people tried to get close to him for his money or connections. It was exhausting. Marcus was different. They'd been friends since college, long before Parker had made his first million. Marcus had stuck by him through the lean years, and he was one of the few people who still treated Parker like a normal human being rather than a walking business opportunity. Parker's assistant, Vivian, knocked on his door. "Your 4 o'clock is here, Mr. Evans." "Send them in," Parker said, pushing thoughts of the dinner party from his mind. He had an empire to run. By Saturday evening, Parker had almost convinced himself to cancel, but the threat of Marcus revealing the embarrassing details of what had happened in San Francisco 2 years ago, involving too much tequila, a karaoke machine, and a badly timed business call was enough to get him into his Tesla and headed toward the address in Brooklyn. Parker rarely ventured to this part of the city. As he navigated the streets, following his GPS, he found himself in a neighborhood filled with brownstones and small shops. It was charming in its own way, though far from the sleek high-rises he was accustomed to. He parked his car and checked the address against the text message. This was definitely it. The brownstone looked well-maintained, with window boxes full of flowers and warm light spilling from the windows. Parker adjusted his casual blazer over his button-down shirt, and jeans. Marcus had specifically told him not to show up in one of his usual tailored suits, and rang the doorbell. The door swung open to reveal Marcus, beaming at him with the satisfied expression of someone who'd just won a bet. "You actually came," he exclaimed, pulling Parker into a quick hug. "I had $100 riding on you bailing at the last minute." "Who bet against you?" Parker asked as he stepped inside. "I did," came a woman's voice from behind them. "I should have known better than to bet against the famous Marcus Reynolds." Parker turned to see a woman with auburn hair pulled back in a stylish twist. She wore a simple navy dress and an apron that suggested she'd been cooking. She was pretty in an understated way, with laugh lines at the corners of her eyes. "Parker, this is my colleague Danielle," Marcus said. "She's the one hosting this little gathering. Danielle, meet Parker Evans, my oldest and most antisocial friend." Parker shot Marcus a look but extended his hand to Danielle. "It's nice to meet you. Thanks for having me." "The pleasure's all mine," Danielle said, shaking his hand. "Marcus talks about you all the time. It's nice to finally put a face to the name." Marcus and Danielle both worked at a mid-sized architectural firm. Parker vaguely remembered Marcus mentioning her a few times, usually in the context of office politics or collaborations on projects. "Can I get you a drink?" Danielle asked, gesturing toward the living room where Parker could see a few other guests mingling. "We have wine, beer, and I make a mean old-fashioned." "An old-fashioned sounds great, thanks," Parker said, already mentally calculating how long he needed to stay to satisfy Marcus without seeming rude. "I'll be right back," Danielle said, heading toward what Parker assumed was the kitchen. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "See, this isn't so bad. Real people, good food, no corporate agendas." "I've been here for all of 2 minutes," Parker replied dryly. "Let's not declare victory just yet." Marcus laughed and steered him toward the living room, making introductions to the small group gathered there. There were 2 other architects from Marcus's firm, a doctor and his wife, and a professor from NYU. Parker made polite conversation, answering the inevitable questions about Titan shipping with practiced ease while deflecting inquiries about his personal life. Danielle returned with his drink, and Parker was just beginning to think that maybe the evening wouldn't be a complete waste of time when the front door opened again. "Sorry I'm late," called a breathless female voice. "The subway was a nightmare, and then I had to run 3 blocks because the next train wasn't coming for 20 minutes. Parker turned toward the voice and felt his world shift slightly on its axis. Standing in the entryway, slightly flushed from running and unwinding a colorful scarf from around her neck, was perhaps the most captivating woman he'd ever seen. She had the same auburn hair as Danielle, though hers fell in loose waves past her shoulders. Her eyes were a striking green that seemed to catch the light, and her smile, wide and genuine as she greeted Danielle with a hug, made something in Parker's chest tighten. "Everyone," Danielle announced, "this is my little sister, Charlotte." "Charlotte, you know most people here except for Marcus's friend, Parker." Charlotte's eyes found Parker's across the room, and for a moment he forgot how to breathe. She smiled, a small, curious lift of her lips, and made her way over to him. "It's nice to meet you, Parker," she said, extending her hand. "I've heard exactly nothing about you, which makes you the most intriguing person here." Parker took her hand, noticing how small it felt in his. "Parker Evans," he said, finding his voice, "and likewise." "I didn't even know Danielle had a sister until about 30 seconds ago." Charlotte laughed, a warm, melodic sound that seemed to fill the room. "That's Danny for you. She probably told you all about her sourdough starter and forgot to mention she had a sibling." "I heard that," Danielle called from across the room. "And I'll have you know my sourdough starter is fascinating conversation material." Charlotte rolled her eyes good-naturedly, and Parker found himself smiling a real smile, not the polite one he usually wore at social functions. "So," Charlotte said, settling onto the couch beside him, "what's your connection to this motley crew? Besides Marcus, I mean." "None, actually. I'm here under duress," Parker admitted. "Marcus threatened to reveal an embarrassing story if I didn't show up." Charlotte's eyebrows shot up. "Now that sounds like a story I need to hear." "Not a chance," Parker said, taking a sip of his drink to hide his smile. "I bet I could get it out of Marcus," Charlotte mused, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "I have no doubt," Parker replied. There was something about her that made him want to keep talking, to find out what made her laugh again. "But I might have to silence him permanently if he tells." Charlotte leaned in slightly. "Are you threatening murder at my sister's dinner party?" Bold move, Parker Evans. The way she said his name sent a strange thrill through him. "Not murder," he clarified, "just strategic career sabotage." "Ah, so you have that kind of power," Charlotte said, studying him with renewed interest. "What exactly do you do?" "I run a shipping company," Parker said, deliberately vague. He didn't want to see that shift in her expression that usually happened when people realized exactly who he was and how much money he had. A shipping company, Charlotte repeated. Like packages, boats, elaborate. Parker found himself explaining the basics of his business without mentioning the scale or his position. Charlotte listened attentively, asking surprisingly insightful questions that revealed she knew more about business than he'd initially assumed. "And what about you?" Parker asked when he'd finished. "What do you do?" "I'm a freelance photographer," Charlotte said. "I specialize in photojournalism, but I do commercial work to pay the bills. I just got back from a 3-week assignment in Peru documenting indigenous communities for a nonprofit." "That sounds fascinating," Parker said, genuinely interested. "What was the most surprising thing you learned?" Charlotte's face lit up as she described her experiences, her hands moving animatedly as she spoke. Parker found himself captivated not just by her stories but by her passion. It had been a long time since he'd talked to someone who seemed so authentically enthusiastic about their work. "Dinner's ready," Danielle called, interrupting them just as Charlotte was showing him photos from her trip on her phone. Parker was surprised to realize that nearly an hour had passed. He'd been so engrossed in their conversation that he hadn't even noticed the time. As they moved to the dining room, Marcus caught his eye and gave him a knowing smirk. Parker ignored him, pulling out a chair for Charlotte before taking the seat beside her. The dinner was excellent, a Moroccan spiced lamb dish with couscous and roasted vegetables that Danielle had apparently learned to make during a cooking vacation in Marrakech. The conversation flowed easily, with none of the stiff formality Parker was used to at business dinners. Throughout the meal, Parker found his attention continually drawn to Charlotte. She had a quick wit and didn't seem intimidated by anyone at the table, including the somewhat pompous doctor who kept trying to dominate the conversation. When she disagreed with someone, she did so thoughtfully, without being confrontational. It was only when the doctor's wife asked Parker about Titan Shipping's recent expansion into Europe that Charlotte's expression changed. "Titan Shipping," she repeated, turning to look at Parker. "You're not just running a shipping company, you're the CEO of Titan." Parker nodded, bracing himself for the shift in her demeanor. "Huh," Charlotte said, studying him with narrowed eyes. "So you were being deliberately vague earlier. Interesting tactic." "I find people act differently when they know," Parker said honestly. "It's refreshing when they don't." Charlotte considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. Though for the record, I don't care if you ship packages or own half of Manhattan. I was enjoying our conversation either way." The simple statement, delivered without artifice, caught Parker off guard. "Thank you," he said, meaning it. As dinner progressed to dessert, a spectacular tiramisu, Parker found himself increasingly drawn to Charlotte. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was undeniable. It was her authenticity, the way she seemed comfortable in her own skin in a way many people never achieved. When the evening finally wound down, Parker was genuinely disappointed. He helped clear the table despite Danielle's protests, using it as an opportunity to prolong his time there. "So," Marcus said, cornering him in the kitchen as he loaded the dishwasher, "ready to admit I was right about getting you out more often." Parker glanced toward the dining room where Charlotte was laughing at something one of the other guests had said. "This time," he conceded. "Just this once." Marcus followed his gaze and grinned. "Charlotte's something else, isn't she? I've only met her a couple of times, but Danielle says she's always been the free spirit of the family. Just got back from Peru, I think." "She mentioned that," Parker said, trying to sound casual. "She's single, you know," Marcus said, not bothering to hide his amusement. "In case you were wondering." "I wasn't," Parker lied. "Sure," Marcus said, patting him on the shoulder. "Well, I've got to head out early, meeting tomorrow. You good to find your way home?" Parker nodded, realizing that the party was breaking up. The doctor and his wife were already saying their goodbyes, and the professor was calling for a ride share. He helped Danielle with the last of the cleanup, aware that he was stalling but unable to help himself. Charlotte had disappeared momentarily, and he was reluctant to leave without saying goodbye. "You don't strike me as someone who normally helps with dishes," Danielle observed as he dried the last of the wine glasses. Parker shrugged. "I'm full of surprises." Danielle said, giving him a knowing look that reminded him of her sister. "You know, Charlotte lives nearby. I bet she'd appreciate a ride home instead of taking the subway this late." Before Parker could respond, Charlotte reappeared, her purse slung over her shoulder. "I should get going," she announced. "Danny, thank you for dinner. It was amazing as always." "Parker was just saying he'd be happy to give you a ride home," Danielle said innocently. Charlotte looked at him with surprise. "Oh, I couldn't impose. I'm used to the subway." "It's no imposition," Parker said quickly. "I'm parked just outside and it's on my way." It absolutely wasn't on his way, given that he lived in a penthouse in Tribeca, but he wasn't about to mention that. Charlotte hesitated, then smiled. "Well, if you're sure, that would be great. The late trains can be a bit sketchy." They said their goodbyes to Danielle, who hugged them both with a self-satisfied expression that made Parker suspect she knew exactly what she was doing. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp, the streets quieter now that it was approaching midnight. Parker led Charlotte to his Tesla, opening the passenger door for her. "Nice car," Charlotte commented as she slid into the seat. "Very eco-conscious billionaire." Parker laughed as he got into the driver's seat. "I like to think it balances out all the cargo ships." Charlotte gave him her address, which was in a neighborhood about 10 minutes away. As they drove, a comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when Charlotte asked if she could turn on the radio. She found a jazz station and turned it down low, just enough to provide a gentle backdrop to the night. "Thank you for the ride," Charlotte said as they pulled up to her building, a converted warehouse with large windows. "I had a really nice time tonight." "So did I," Parker said, turning to face her. "It was unexpected." Charlotte smiled, her eyes reflecting the street lights. "The best things usually are." She hesitated, then added, "Would you like to come up for coffee? Real coffee, I mean. I brought back some amazing beans from Peru." Parker knew he should say no. He had an early meeting, and getting involved with someone like Charlotte, someone so different from him, someone who might actually matter, was probably a bad idea. But the thought of returning to his empty penthouse held no appeal. "I'd like that," he said. Charlotte's apartment was on the 4th floor of the building, a spacious loft with high ceilings and exposed brick walls. It was eclectic in a way that spoke of a life. Well-traveled photographs and artwork from around the world hung on the walls, colorful textiles draped over furniture, and plants thrived in every corner. "Make yourself at home," Charlotte said, hanging up her coat and heading to the kitchen area. "I'll put on the coffee." Parker wandered around the space, drawn to the photographs that he now realized must be Charlotte's work. They were stunning, intimate portraits of people from different cultures, landscapes that somehow captured not just the scene but the feeling of being there, and street scenes full of life and movement. "These are incredible," he said, studying a black and white image of an elderly woman with lines etched deep into her face, her eyes conveying a lifetime of experiences. "Thank you," Charlotte said, joining him as the coffee brewed. "That's Mama Alina. She's a weaver in a small village in the Andes. She taught me how to spin wool using a drop spindle." "You're really talented," Parker said, turning to look at her. In the soft lighting of her apartment, with her hair slightly tousled and her eyes bright, she was breathtaking. "I'm passionate about it," Charlotte corrected. "The talent part comes from years of practice and making a lot of mistakes." They moved to her couch as the coffee finished brewing. Charlotte poured them each a cup, and Parker had to admit it was possibly the best coffee he'd ever tasted. Their conversation flowed as easily as it had at dinner, moving from photography to travel to books they'd read recently. Parker found himself telling her things he rarely shared with anyone about the pressure of running a global company, about how lonely success could be, about his fears that he was becoming the kind of disconnected executive he'd always despised. Charlotte listened without judgment, sharing her own struggles with balancing her art with commercial work, her desire to make a difference with her photography, and her sometimes complicated relationship with her more conventional sister. "Don't get me wrong," she said, curling her legs underneath her on the couch. "I adore Danny, but she took the safe route: college, steady job, retirement plan. I took the heart attack-inducing route, as my father calls it." "And yet you seem happy," Parker observed. Charlotte smiled. "I am, mostly. There are days when I worry about health care and retirement and all those adult things. But then I get to stand on a mountain in Peru and watch the sun rise, or capture the exact moment a child realizes something for the first time, and I know I made the right choice." Parker envied her certainty. His own path had been driven by a mixture of ambition, opportunity, and a desire to prove himself. He'd achieved more than he'd ever imagined, but moments of pure joy, those were rarer than he cared to admit. As the night deepened, they moved closer to each other on the couch, the initial polite distance between them gradually disappearing. When Charlotte laughed at something he said, her hand briefly touched his arm, and the contact sent a current through him that had nothing to do with caffeine. "It's getting late," Parker said eventually, noticing that it was well past 2 in the morning. "I should probably go." Charlotte nodded, though she made no move to get up. "Probably." Their eyes met, and Parker felt that shift again, like the world was realigning itself around this moment. He leaned forward slightly, giving her time to pull away if he'd misread the situation. She didn't. Instead, she closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepened as Parker's hand moved to the small of her back, drawing her closer. When they finally broke apart, Charlotte's eyes were wide and a bit dazed. "That was." "Yeah," Parker agreed, his heart racing. Charlotte smiled, a slow, sweet curve of her lips. "I don't usually kiss billionaires on the first meeting." "I don't usually kiss anyone," Parker admitted. "Well," Charlotte said, her fingers lightly tracing the line of his jaw, "I'm glad we're both making exceptions." They kissed again, longer this time, with a growing urgency that surprised them both. It was Charlotte who finally pulled away, her cheeks flushed. "I think," she said, a bit breathlessly, "that if you don't leave now, you might not leave at all." Parker knew she was right. Whatever this was between them, it deserved more than a hasty first night. He wanted to know her, really know her, before they took that step. "Can I see you again?" he asked, standing up reluctantly. Charlotte's smile was answer enough, but she said, "I'd like that. Very much." They exchanged phone numbers, and Parker programmed hers into his phone with a care usually reserved for multi-million-dollar contracts. At her door, he kissed her once more, a soft promise of things to come. "Good night, Charlotte." "Good night, Parker," she replied, her voice warm with possibility. "Drive safely." As Parker drove back to his apartment, the city seemed different, somehow more alive, more vibrant. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this way, this strange mixture of excitement and contentment. He owed Marcus big time. But for once, Parker didn't mind being in his friend's debt. The next morning, Parker woke up with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. As he went through his usual routine, a 5-mile run, a protein-packed breakfast, a review of the overnight reports from Titan's Asian offices, his thoughts kept returning to Charlotte. Her smile, her laugh, the feel of her lips against his. He wanted to text her immediately but forced himself to wait until a reasonable hour. It was Sunday, after all. She might be sleeping in. At 9 a.m. he finally gave in and composed a message. "Good morning. I really enjoyed last night. How does dinner tonight sound? I know a great Italian place in the village." He hit send before he could overthink it, then tried to distract himself with work. When his phone buzzed 10 minutes later, he nearly dropped it in his haste to check the message. "Good morning to you too. I enjoyed last night as well. Dinner sounds perfect. But instead of Italian, how about I cook for you? My place, 7 p.m. Parker felt a smile spread across his face. "Even better, can I bring anything, just yourself? And maybe a bottle of red wine. Done. See you at 7. Parker spent the rest of the day in a state of distracted anticipation. He reviewed quarterly projections without really seeing the numbers, held a video conference with his European directors while thinking about what to wear that evening, and finally gave up on work altogether around 4. He showered, shaved, and changed into dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that Marcus had once told him made him look almost human instead of like a corporate robot. At a high-end wine shop, he selected a bottle of Barolo that the owner assured him was exceptional, then added a second bottle just in case. At 6:55, Parker stood outside Charlotte's building, wine in hand, feeling uncharacteristically nervous. He was a man who regularly negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, yet the prospect of dinner with this woman he barely knew had his heart racing. Charlotte answered the door wearing a simple green dress that brought out her eyes, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked even more beautiful than he remembered. "Hi," she said, her smile genuine and warm. "Right on time." "Military father," Parker explained, handing her the wine. Punctuality was non-negotiable. "Well, I appreciate it," Charlotte said, taking the bottles. "Wow, these look fancy. I hope the food lives up to the wine." "I'm sure it will," Parker said, following her into the apartment. The space was filled with delicious aromas that made his stomach growl appreciatively. "Whatever you're making smells amazing." "Just a simple pasta dish," Charlotte said, moving to the kitchen area where various ingredients were spread across the counter. "My specialty is pappardelle with wild mushroom ragu. I hope you're not vegetarian or gluten-free." "Definitely not," Parker assured her. "Can I help with anything?" "You can open one of these lovely bottles while I finish up," Charlotte suggested, handing him a corkscrew. Parker opened the wine and poured them each a glass while Charlotte put the finishing touches on their meal. They moved around each other with an ease that belied their short acquaintance, as if they'd done this dance many times before, over dinner, which was indeed as delicious as it had smelled. They continued the conversation they'd started the night before. Parker found himself sharing stories from his childhood growing up as the son of a career Navy officer, moving every few years, the discipline that had shaped him into the man he was today. "Is that why you went into shipping?" Charlotte asked. "Because of your father's naval background?" Parker considered this. "I never thought about it that way, but maybe subconsciously. My father always wanted me to join the military, but I knew it wasn't for me. Starting Titan was my own path, but I guess ships were in my blood." "And what does he think of your success now?" Charlotte asked, refilling their wine glasses. "He died before Titan really took off," Parker said quietly. "Heart attack 6 years ago. He saw the beginning, but not how far it's come." "I'm sorry," Charlotte said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "That must be hard." Parker nodded, appreciating her simple acknowledgement rather than the platitudes he usually received. "What about your parents? You mentioned your father earlier." "They're both still around," Charlotte said, "living in Connecticut where we grew up. My dad was a high school principal, my mom a nurse. They're the epitome of solid, responsible, middle-class Americans, which makes my lifestyle choices all the more baffling to them. They don't approve of your photography, Parker asked. They're supportive in theory, Charlotte said with a small shrug. They come to my exhibitions and tell their friends about my work, but I know they worry. My mother sends me job listings for staff photographer positions at magazines or corporate jobs with benefits. My father sets aside money for me just in case, which is sweet, but also his way of preparing for what he sees as the inevitable failure of my freelance career. And Danielle, Charlotte smiled fondly. Danny's my biggest cheerleader, even though she doesn't always understand why I need to trek through remote regions when I could be taking perfectly nice photos in Central Park. She's the practical one. I'm the dreamer. It's always been that way. After dinner, they moved to Charlotte's couch with their wine and the remainder of the chocolate torte she'd made for dessert. As they talked, the space between them gradually disappeared until Charlotte was nestled against Parker's side, his arm around her shoulders. "Can I ask you something?" she said, looking up at him. "Anything," Parker replied, meaning it. "Why did Marcus have to blackmail you into coming to dinner last night? Are you really that antisocial, or was it just bad timing?" Parker chuckled. "A bit of both. I've become somewhat isolated over the years. Success has a way of changing how people interact with you. Everyone wants something: a job, a connection, an investment. It's easier to just focus on work." "That sounds lonely," Charlotte observed. "It can be," Parker admitted, "but it's also safer." "Safer than what?" "Than this," Parker said, gesturing between them, "opening up to someone, taking a chance." Charlotte studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "And yet here you are." "Here I am," Parker agreed, "breaking all my own rules." "Why?" Charlotte asked softly. Parker looked at her, really looked at her. At the flecks of gold in her green eyes, the faint freckles across her nose, the curve of her lips. "Because from the moment you walked into that room last night, I couldn't look away. Because talking to you felt more real than anything has in years. Because when I kissed you, everything else just faded away." Charlotte's eyes widened slightly at his honesty. Then she leaned forward and kissed him, a soft press of lips that quickly deepened as Parker pulled her closer. This time, when they broke apart, neither of them suggested he should leave. Instead, Charlotte took his hand and led him toward her bedroom, her eyes asking a silent question that Parker answered by following her willingly, his heart pounding with anticipation and something that felt dangerously close to hope. The next morning, Parker woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the weight of Charlotte's head on his chest, her auburn hair spread across his skin. For a moment, he just breathed, taking in the unfamiliar sensation of contentment. Charlotte stirred, her eyes fluttering open to meet his. "Morning," she murmured, her voice husky with sleep. "Morning," he replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Sleep well," she smiled, stretching like a cat. "Better than I have in ages." She propped herself up on one elbow, studying him. "You're still here. Did you think I wouldn't be?" "I didn't know what to think," she said honestly. "For all I know, billionaires have a special app that summons helicopters to whisk them away at dawn." Parker laughed. "No helicopters. Though I do need to get to the office eventually." "On a Monday morning? How conventional," Charlotte teased, laying her head back on his chest. Parker ran his fingers through her hair, marveling at its softness. "What about you? What does your Monday look like?" "I have a meeting with an editor at National Geographic at 11, Charlotte said. "They're interested in my Peru photos for a feature." "That's impressive," Parker said, genuinely proud. "National Geographic is the pinnacle for photographers, isn't it?" "Pretty much," Charlotte agreed. "It would be a huge break if they run the feature." They lay there for a while longer, reluctant to break the bubble of intimacy that had formed around them. Eventually, though, reality intruded in the form of Parker's phone buzzing repeatedly from the living room where he'd left it. With a sigh, he disentangled himself from Charlotte. "I should check that. It might be important." He returned a moment later, his expression apologetic. "I'm sorry, but I have to go. There's an issue with one of our ships in Singapore that needs my immediate attention." Charlotte nodded, sitting up and pulling the sheet around her. "Of course. The shipping empire waits for no man." Parker hesitated, suddenly unsure of the protocol. They'd known each other for less than 48 hours, yet he felt more connected to her than to people he'd worked with for years. "Can I see you again? Tonight, maybe?" Charlotte smiled, the morning light catching the gold in her hair. "I'd like that, but I have a better idea. Why don't you give me your address and I'll come to you this time? I'm curious to see how the other half lives." Parker felt a momentary panic at the thought of Charlotte in his sterile, impersonal penthouse. "It's nothing special," he hedged. "I find that hard to believe," Charlotte said, raising an eyebrow. "But if you're embarrassed by your solid gold bathtub, I promise not to judge." Parker laughed despite himself. "No gold bathtubs, it's not very homey. It's more of a place to sleep than a real home." "All the more reason for me to see it," Charlotte said firmly. "I'll bring takeout. Text me your address." Parker nodded, relieved and nervous in equal measure. 7:30. "Perfect," Charlotte said, leaning forward to kiss him goodbye. "Now go save your ship." As Parker rushed home to change before heading to the office, he found himself smiling despite the brewing crisis in Singapore. For the first time in as long as he could remember, work wasn't the only thing on his mind. The crisis, a mechanical issue that had delayed one of Titan's largest container ships, threatening to disrupt the supply chain for several major clients, consumed most of Parker's day. It was after 6 by the time everything was resolved, and he realized with a start that Charlotte would be at his place in less than 90 minutes. He hurried home, surveying his penthouse with fresh eyes as he entered. The space was impeccably designed, all sleek lines, neutral colors, and expensive minimalist furniture. It had been featured in an architectural digest 2 years ago, but looking at it now, Parker had to admit it lacked warmth. There were no personal photos, no mementos, nothing that really spoke to who he was as a person. With a sudden determination, he made a few quick calls. By the time Charlotte arrived, promptly at 7:30, his usually pristine dining table was cluttered with containers of Italian food from his favorite restaurant. A vase of hastily purchased flowers sat on the coffee table, and he'd managed to dig out some candles from a drawer where they'd been stored unused since he'd moved in. When the elevator opened directly into his penthouse, a feature that had seemed impressive when he'd bought the place, but now struck him as oddly impersonal, Charlotte stepped out with 2 bags in her hands and an expression of barely concealed curiosity. "Wow," she said, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows with their panoramic view of Manhattan. "This is exactly what I expected, actually." Parker laughed, taking the bags from her. "I told you it wasn't very homey." "It's beautiful," Charlotte said, wandering toward the windows. "And I hired the most expensive interior designer in New York kind of way." "Guilty as charged," Parker admitted. "Though in my defense, I told her to make it functional and low maintenance. I didn't realize that translated to soulless bachelor pad until it was too late." Charlotte turned to him, her expression softening. "It's not soulless, it's just waiting for someone to live in it properly." She gestured to the dining table. "I see you've already got dinner covered. I hope you don't mind," Parker said. "You mentioned Italian last night, so I ordered from this place I know. But I see you brought food too." Charlotte held up the bags she'd brought. "Just wine and dessert. I figured a man who lives like this probably doesn't bake his own tiramisu." "You would be correct," Parker said, taking the bags from her. "Though now I'm a bit embarrassed that I didn't think of dessert." "That's why you need me around," Charlotte said lightly, but the comment hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities. Over dinner, they talked about their days, Parker's shipping crisis and Charlotte's meeting with National Geographic, which had gone well enough that they'd commissioned a series of articles from her. "That's fantastic," Parker said, genuinely pleased for her. "When do you start?" "That's the catch," Charlotte said, twirling pasta around her fork. "They want me to leave for Asia in 2 weeks. It's a 6-country tour that would last about 3 months. Parker felt a sudden hollowness in his chest. 3 months, Charlotte nodded, not meeting his eyes. "It's an amazing opportunity, the kind that could really establish me in the industry." "You have to take it," Parker said immediately, pushing aside his own disappointment. "It's exactly what you've been working toward, right?" Charlotte looked up, her expression a mixture of relief and something else Parker couldn't quite identify. "It is, but what?" She gestured between them. "This is. I don't know what this is exactly, but it feels important, and the timing is terrible." Parker reached across the table to take her hand. "Charlotte, I'm not going anywhere. 3 months is nothing." "You'd wait?" she asked, sounding genuinely surprised. "We barely know each other." "I think we know the important parts," Parker said, "and I'd like the chance to learn the rest. Even if that means doing it long distance for a while." Charlotte studied him, as if trying to determine his sincerity. Most guys would run for the hills if a woman they just met told them she was leaving the country for 3 months. "I'm not most guys," Parker said simply. "No," Charlotte agreed, a smile slowly spreading across her face. "You're definitely not." After dinner, they moved to Parker's couch, the city lights twinkling below them as night fell. Charlotte curled against him, her head on his shoulder, and Parker felt that unfamiliar contentment settle over him again. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. Charlotte murmured, sounding sleepy and content. "Why photography? What drew you to it?" Charlotte was quiet for a moment, considering. "When I was 10, my grandfather gave me an old film camera. Nothing fancy, just a basic Nikon. But he taught me how to use it, aperture, shutter speed, all the technical stuff. And then he said something I've never forgotten. Photography isn't about capturing what something looks like. It's about capturing how it feels." She shifted to look up at him. "I was hooked from that first roll of film. The idea that I could freeze a moment, preserve a feeling, share how I see the world with other people, it was like discovering a superpower." Parker nodded, understanding her passion even if he'd never experienced anything similar himself. His own career had been built on opportunity and aptitude rather than passion. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man." "He was," Charlotte said softly. "He died when I was in college, but I still hear his voice sometimes when I'm setting up a shot." "And your parents? When did they realize you were serious about photography?" Charlotte laughed. "Probably when I turned down a full scholarship to business school to study photojournalism instead. My father didn't speak to me for a week. But they came around. Eventually," Charlotte said. "My first real exhibition helped. Seeing my work on gallery walls, hearing other people praise it, I think that's when they realized it wasn't just a phase." Parker tried to imagine his own father's reaction if he'd chosen a creative path instead of business. The thought was almost laughable. Admiral Evans had been a man of duty and discipline, not artistic expression. "What about you?" Charlotte asked, interrupting his thoughts. "Was Titan always the plan?" Parker shook his head. "Not at all. I was pre-law at Columbia, actually. My father wanted me to become a JAG officer, military lawyer," he explained when Charlotte looked confused. "But during my senior year, My maternal grandfather died and left me a small inheritance, just enough to start something of my own. And that something became Titan. Eventually, Parker said. It started as a simple freight forwarding business, basically middlemen connecting shippers with carriers. But I saw inefficiencies in the system, ways to streamline operations using technology. We developed proprietary software that revolutionized how shipping logistics were handled, and the company grew from there. That's impressive, Charlotte said. But does it make you happy? The question caught Parker off guard. No one had asked him that in years, perhaps ever, when it came to his work. People asked about profits, growth strategies, market share, never happiness. It's satisfying, he said carefully. Seeing something you've built succeed, knowing you've created jobs for thousands of people, that's gratifying. But happy, he shrugged. I'm not sure I've thought about it in those terms. Charlotte sat up to look at him properly, her expression thoughtful. What does make you happy, Parker Evans? Parker met her gaze, suddenly certain of his answer. This, he said simply. Being here with you, talking like this, it's the happiest I've been in a very long time. Charlotte's eyes widened slightly as if his honesty had surprised her. Then she leaned forward and kissed him, soft and sweet. Me too, she whispered against his lips. Later that night, as they lay in his king-sized bed, Charlotte's head on his chest and her breathing deep and even in sleep, Parker stared at the ceiling and tried to process the whirlwind of the past 48 hours. He'd never fallen for anyone this quickly, this completely. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure, and in 2 weeks, she would leave for 3 months. The rational part of his brain, the CEO part, told him this was actually perfect timing. He had the Dubai expansion to focus on, the new fleet of eco-friendly ships being built in South Korea, the ongoing technology upgrades across the company. 3 months would fly by in a blur of work. But another part of him, a part he'd almost forgotten existed, already ached at the thought of her absence. It was ridiculous, he knew. They just met. And yet, Charlotte stirred against him, murmuring something in her sleep. Parker tightened his arm around her, breathing in the scent of her hair, and decided to worry about the future tomorrow. Tonight, he would simply be grateful for this unexpected gift. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of work and Charlotte. Parker adjusted his usually rigid schedule to accommodate late dinners, impromptu movie nights, and even a weekend trip to the Hamptons. They alternated between his penthouse and her loft, each space taking on new warmth and meaning with the other's presence. Charlotte introduced Parker to her small circle of friends, mostly fellow photographers and journalists, with a few artists thrown in at a gallery opening for a colleague. Parker was surprised to find he enjoyed their company, their passion for their work reminding him of the early days of Titan, when he'd been driven by innovation rather than quarterly reports. In turn, Parker introduced Charlotte to Marcus, properly this time, and a few other friends from his college days who weren't connected to his business life. They had dinner at a small, family-owned restaurant in Queens that Parker had discovered years ago and kept as his personal secret, a place where he could eat in peace, without the constant networking that accompanied most of his meals out. "I can't believe you've been keeping this place to yourself," Charlotte said as they shared a plate of the most incredible handmade dumplings she'd ever tasted. "These are life-changing." "That's why I keep it to myself," Parker replied, watching her enjoyment with pleasure. If word got out, it would be impossible to get a table. As they left the restaurant, the elderly owner patted Parker's arm and said something in Mandarin, looking approvingly at Charlotte. "What did she say?" Charlotte asked as they walked to the car. Parker felt his cheeks warm slightly. "She said I finally brought someone worthy of the special dumplings." Charlotte laughed, linking her arm through his. High praise indeed. I'm honored. The night before Charlotte was due to leave for her assignment, they had dinner at her apartment. She'd insisted on cooking, though her refrigerator was nearly empty in preparation for her long absence. It's a clean-out-the-pantry special, she admitted, as she served him a surprisingly delicious pasta made with an eclectic mix of ingredients. Sorry it's not more elaborate for our last night. It's perfect, Parker assured her, reaching across the table to take her hand. Everything about tonight is perfect. After dinner, they sat on her small balcony, sharing a bottle of wine and looking at the stars barely visible through the city's light pollution. I got you something, Parker said, reaching into his pocket. A going-away present. Parker, you didn't have to, I wanted to, he interrupted, handing her a small, wrapped package. Charlotte opened it carefully to reveal a sleek satellite phone. Thank you. Though I do have a regular phone. Parker laughed at her confused expression. It's not just any satellite phone. It's connected to Titan's private network. We have them on all our ships and in remote offices. It works literally anywhere on the planet, and the battery lasts for weeks on standby. Understanding dawned on Charlotte's face. So we can talk even when I'm in the middle of nowhere. Exactly, Parker said. I've programmed my number in as the first contact. One button and you're connected to me, no matter where you are. Charlotte turned the phone over in her hands, her expression soft. This is actually incredibly thoughtful. Thank you. There's something else, Parker said, suddenly nervous. I want to show you something tomorrow before your flight. Can you spare an hour in the morning? Of course, Charlotte said, curiosity evident in her voice. What is it? A surprise, Parker said, offering no further explanation despite her attempts to get him to reveal more. The next morning, Parker picked Charlotte up in his car and drove to a part of Brooklyn she wasn't familiar with. They pulled up in front of an unassuming brick building, and Parker led her inside to an elevator that took them to the top floor. Parker, what is this? Charlotte asked as he unlocked a door and ushered her inside. She found herself in a large, open space with windows on 3 sides, flooding the room with natural light. The space was empty except for a few pieces of furniture covered with drop cloths. I bought this building about 5 years ago, Parker explained, watching her reaction carefully. I was going to convert it into luxury condos, but the project got sidelined and I never got around to selling it. Charlotte walked to one of the windows, taking in the view of the Brooklyn Bridge and Manhattan beyond. It's amazing space. All this light would be perfect for a studio. She trailed off, turning to look at Parker with wide eyes as she realized the implication. That's what I was thinking, Parker said, moving to join her at the window. When you mentioned that your current apartment isn't ideal for developing your own prints or staging larger work, I remembered this place. It's been sitting empty and I thought, maybe when you get back you might want to use it as a studio, or whatever you want, really. Charlotte stared at him, clearly stunned. Parker, I can't accept this, it's too much. It's not a gift, Parker clarified quickly. It's an investment in you and your work. We can figure out the details when you get back, rent, renovations, whatever makes you comfortable. But the space is yours if you want it. Charlotte looked around the room again, and Parker could see her photographer's eye assessing the light, the dimensions, the possibilities. It's perfect, she admitted. But still, it's a big commitment for both of us. Parker took her hands in his. I know it's fast. Everything about us has been. But Charlotte, I've never been more certain about anything. When you come back from this trip, I want to build something real with you. And if this space can help you build your career at the same time, that makes me happy. Charlotte's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. You're a remarkable man, Parker Evans. Is that a yes? He asked, his heart in his throat. In answer, Charlotte reached up to kiss him, pouring everything she couldn't say into the gesture. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, she whispered, "It's a yes. To all of it." They spent Charlotte's last hour before she needed to leave for the airport in the empty space, sitting on the floor by the windows, planning what it could become. Parker, who had never been particularly interested in design beyond functionality, found himself caught up in Charlotte's vision for the space, a darkroom in one corner, a small gallery area for displaying work in progress, workspace for editing and framing. When it was finally time to leave for the airport, they were both reluctant to go. The 3 months ahead suddenly seemed like an eternity. At the airport, Parker walked Charlotte as far as security would allow. As they stood at the checkpoint, neither of them quite ready to say goodbye, Charlotte reached into her camera bag and pulled out an envelope. "I have something for you too," she said, handing it to him. "But don't open it until I'm gone. Promise." Parker nodded, tucking the envelope inside his jacket. "I promise. Call me when you land in Tokyo." "I will," Charlotte said, then smiled. "Or I'll use my fancy new satellite phone if regular service fails me." Parker pulled her close one last time, memorizing the feel of her in his arms, the scent of her hair, the way she fit perfectly against him. "Be safe," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "and come back to me." "I will," Charlotte promised, reaching up to touch his face gently. "Take care of yourself while I'm gone. No working yourself to death, okay?" Parker nodded, not trusting himself to speak. With a final kiss that held both promise and longing, Charlotte pulled away and headed toward security, turning back once to wave before disappearing into the crowd. Parker stood there long after she was gone, feeling as though a part of him had left with her. Finally, he made his way back to his car, where he remembered the envelope Charlotte had given him. He opened it carefully to find a photograph inside. It was one he hadn't seen before, the two of them on the beach during their weekend in the Hamptons. They were sitting on the sand, Parker's arm around Charlotte as they watched the sunset. Neither of them was looking at the camera. Instead, they were caught in a moment of perfect contentment, the setting sun casting a golden glow over them. On the back, Charlotte had written, "The moment I knew this was real. See you in 3 months." Parker traced her handwriting with his finger, a smile forming despite the ache in his chest. 3 months. He could wait 3 months for the rest of his life to begin. The first month of Charlotte's absence passed in a blur of work for Parker. He threw himself into the Dubai expansion, spending long hours in meetings and on conference calls, using the time difference between New York and Asia to his advantage so he could talk to Charlotte when she was finished with her day's shooting. Their conversations, sometimes crisp and clear, other times fragmented by distance and technology, became the highlights of his days. Charlotte's stories of the people she was meeting, the places she was documenting, the food she was trying, all of it fascinated him, pulling him out of his world of spreadsheets and logistics into one of color and humanity. "I wish you could see this, Parker," she said one night, her voice slightly distorted by the satellite connection. She was in a remote village in Vietnam, documenting the impact of climate change on traditional farming practices. "The landscape here is like nothing I've ever seen. These incredible terraced rice fields that climb up the mountains like giant green steps. And the people are so resilient, so connected to the land." "Take lots of pictures," Parker said, smiling at the ceiling of his bedroom as he lay in bed, imagining her halfway around the world. "I want to see it all when you get back." "Pictures don't do it justice," Charlotte said. "You should come see it for yourself," Parker laughed. "Right, let me just clear my schedule and hop on a plane to Vietnam." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Why not?" "You're the boss, aren't you? Can't you work remotely for a while? The question caught Parker off guard. It had never occurred to him to just leave, to put his own desires above the daily demands of Titan. I don't know, he said honestly. I've never tried. Think about it, Charlotte said. I'm heading to Cambodia next week, then Thailand. You could meet me there. We could travel together for a bit before I have to go to Indonesia. The idea took root in Parker's mind, growing more appealing by the moment. I'll think about it, he promised. After they hung up, Parker lay awake for hours, considering the possibility. Could he really just take off in the middle of a major expansion? What would his board say? His executive team? But then another voice in his head, one that sounded suspiciously like Marcus, asked a different question. What was the point of all this success if he couldn't use it to live the life he wanted? The next morning, Parker called his COO, Jane, into his office. Jane had been with Titan almost from the beginning, rising through the ranks to become Parker's most trusted executive. If anyone could handle things in his absence, it was her. I need to take some time off, Parker said without preamble as Jane settled into the chair across from his desk. Jane's eyebrows shot up. Time off? Are you dying? Parker laughed. No, nothing like that. I just need a break. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Okay, who are you and what have you done with Parker Evans? Jane asked, only half joking. In the 10 years I've known you, you've never taken more than 4 days off at a time, and even then you were answering emails from the golf course. Parker sighed, knowing he owed Jane more of an explanation. I've met someone. She's on assignment in Southeast Asia for a few months, and I want to go see her. Jane's expression softened into a smile. Well, it's about time. Is this the photographer Marcus has been hinting about? Parker made a mental note to kill Marcus later. Yes, her name is Charlotte, and she's special. She must be, Jane said, her tone gentle. Look, Parker, if anyone deserves some time off, it's you. We can handle things here. The Dubai deal is almost finalized, the new ships are on schedule, and anything urgent can be handled via video conference. She paused, then added, Go. Be happy. The shipping empire will still be here when you get back. Relief washed over Parker. Thank you, Jane. I'll start making arrangements today. Just one condition, Jane said, a mischievous glint in her eye. I want to meet this woman who's managed to drag you away from your desk. Bring her by when you get back. Deal, Parker said, already reaching for his phone to call his travel agent. 3 days later, Parker was on a first-class flight to Bangkok, where he would meet Charlotte before they traveled together to Cambodia. He'd had his assistant arrange everything: hotels, transportation, even appropriate clothing for the climate with an efficiency that impressed even him. The anticipation of seeing Charlotte after 6 weeks apart made the 14-hour flight seem even longer. Parker tried to work, tried to sleep, but mostly found himself staring out the window at the endless sky, thinking about the woman waiting for him on the other side of the world. When he finally stepped into the arrival hall at Bangkok's Suvarnabhumi airport, exhausted but exhilarated, he scanned the crowd anxiously. And then he saw her standing near a pillar, her camera hanging around her neck, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy bun, her eyes searching just as eagerly. Their eyes met across the crowded terminal, and Charlotte's face broke into a radiant smile that made Parker's heart stumble in his chest. He moved toward her, barely conscious of the other travelers around him, his focus entirely on the woman who had somehow become the center of his world in just a matter of weeks. Charlotte ran the last few steps, throwing herself into his arms with an abandon that made Parker laugh out loud. He lifted her off her feet, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her in his arms after so many nights of just her voice. "You're here," Charlotte said, pulling back just enough to look at his face, her hands framing his jaw as if to make sure he was real. "You actually came." "Of course I came," Parker said, leaning down to kiss her, not caring who saw or what they thought. "I missed you." The next 2 weeks were like nothing Parker had ever experienced. They traveled from Bangkok to Cambodia, where Charlotte finished her assignment documenting the restoration efforts of ancient temples, and then on to a small island in Thailand, where they stayed in a beachfront bungalow with no television, spotty internet, and views that made Parker understand why Charlotte had fallen in love with photography. During the day, he would sometimes work on his laptop while Charlotte was shooting, handling the most critical emails and participating in video conferences when necessary. But more often, he found himself accompanying her, carrying equipment, watching in fascination as she worked, seeing the world through her eyes. In the evenings, they would walk on the beach, eat at local restaurants where Parker tried dishes he would never have ordered on his own, and talk for hours under stars that seemed impossibly bright away from the city lights. It was on their last night in Thailand, as they sat on the beach watching the sunset, that Parker realized he was holding his breath, trying to capture every detail of the moment, the way the fading light turned Charlotte's hair to fire, the sound of the waves gently lapping at the shore, the feel of her hand in his. "What are you thinking?" Charlotte asked, noticing his intense expression. Parker turned to her, suddenly certain of what he needed to say. "I'm thinking that I love you, and that I've probably loved you since the moment you walked into your sister's apartment and complained about the subway." Charlotte's eyes widened, then softened, a smile spreading across her face that rivaled the sunset in beauty. "I love you too," she said, her voice sure and steady. "I think I knew it that first night at my apartment, when you looked at my photographs like they were treasures and talked to me like what I had to say mattered." Parker pulled her close, kissing her with all the emotion he couldn't put into words. As they sat there, wrapped in each other in the growing darkness, he felt a peace he hadn't known was possible. "I don't want to leave tomorrow," Charlotte admitted, her head on his shoulder. "These 2 weeks have been like a dream." "Then don't," Parker said impulsively. "Cancel the rest of the assignment. Come back to New York with me. The studio is waiting for you," and Charlotte placed her finger against his lips, stopping him. "Parker, I can't do that. This assignment is important not just for my career, but for the stories that need to be told. I have responsibilities, commitments." Parker sighed, knowing she was right. It was one of the things he loved about her, her integrity, her dedication to her work. "I know I'm being selfish." "A little," Charlotte agreed with a small smile, "but it's nice to be wanted that much. And it's only 6 more weeks. Then I'll be home, and we can really start building our life together." "Our life together," Parker repeated, liking the sound of it. "I want that more than anything." The next day, saying goodbye at the Bangkok airport was even harder than it had been in New York. Parker watched Charlotte walk through security, already counting the days until she would return home to him, to the life they were planning together. On the long flight back to New York, Parker found himself doing something he rarely did, daydreaming. He thought about the studio he'd given Charlotte, about helping her set it up, about evenings spent there while she worked, and he caught up on emails. He thought about introducing her to his mother, who lived in Florida and whom he didn't see nearly often enough. He thought about holidays and travel, and all the ordinary days in between that would be extraordinary simply because they would share them. By the time his plane landed at JFK, Parker had made 2 decisions. First, he was going to find a better balance between work and personal life. The world hadn't ended because he'd taken 2 weeks off, and seeing Jane's confident handling of things in his absence had been a wake-up call. He'd built a strong team. It was time to trust them more. Second, when Charlotte returned from her assignment, he was going to ask her to marry him. It might seem fast to others, but Parker had never been more certain of anything in his life. The 6 weeks until Charlotte's return seemed interminable, but Parker filled them with purpose. At work, he delegated more, made time for strategic thinking rather than micromanaging, and even left the office before 8 most evenings, a change that had his assistant checking if he was ill. In his personal life, he focused on the studio space for Charlotte. Working with a contractor she had recommended, he oversaw the renovations based on the plans they had discussed that last morning before she left for her assignment. A proper darkroom was installed, along with specialized lighting for photography, a small kitchenette, and a comfortable workspace where she could edit and organize her photographs. He also spent time with Marcus, who was smugly pleased with his role in bringing Parker and Charlotte together. "I expect to be best man at the wedding," Marcus declared over dinner at their favorite steakhouse. "And godfather to your first child." Parker nearly choked on his wine. "Isn't it a bit soon to be talking about children?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're planning to propose to a woman you've known for less than 3 months, but children is where you draw the line for too soon." Put that way, it did sound a bit ridiculous, but Parker just shrugged. "When you know, you know." "And you know with Charlotte," Marcus said, his teasing tone giving way to sincerity. "I do," Parker confirmed. "She makes me see the world differently, makes me want to be better, makes me happy in a way I didn't know was possible." Marcus raised his glass in a toast. "Then I'm thrilled for you both, and I meant what I said about being best man." Parker clinked his glass against Marcus's. "Wouldn't have anyone else." The night before Charlotte was due to return, Parker could barely sleep. He'd arranged to pick her up at the airport himself, rather than sending a car as he might have done before. He wanted to be the first person she saw when she stepped off that plane. As he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Parker's phone buzzed with a text. It was from Charlotte. "Can't sleep. Too excited to see you tomorrow. I love you." Parker smiled in the darkness, typing back. "Same here. 14 hours and counting. I love you too." The next day, as Parker stood in the arrival area of JFK, a sense of déjà vu washed over him. Except this time, he was the one waiting anxiously, searching the crowd for a glimpse of auburn hair. When Charlotte finally appeared, looking tired but radiant, Parker felt that same rush of emotion he'd experienced in Bangkok. She dropped her bags and ran to him, and he caught her just as he had before, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that said everything words couldn't. "Welcome home," Parker said when he finally set her down, touching her face as if to reassure himself that she was really there. "Home," Charlotte repeated, her eyes shining. "I like the sound of that." As they drove from the airport to Charlotte's apartment, she talked animatedly about the last leg of her journey, the people she'd met in Indonesia, the incredible landscapes she'd photographed, the challenges of working in remote areas with unreliable equipment. "I can't wait to show you the photos," she said, her enthusiasm undimmed despite what must have been an exhausting journey. "Some of them are my best work yet, I think." "I can't wait to see them," Parker said honestly. "But first, there's something I want to show you." Instead of turning toward Charlotte's apartment, Parker took a different route, heading toward the building where her new studio was located. "The studio," Charlotte guessed, sitting up straighter in her seat. "Is it finished?" Parker nodded, trying to contain his own excitement. "Just in time for your return. I wanted it to be ready for you to start work whenever you felt up to it." When they arrived at the building, Parker led Charlotte upstairs, enjoying her growing anticipation. At the door to the studio, he handed her a key. "Your studio, Miss Palmer. Would you like to do the honors?" Charlotte took the key with a trembling hand and unlocked the door, pushing it open slowly as if savoring the moment. The space was transformed from the empty room they had stood in 3 months ago. The large windows were now framed with adjustable blackout blinds to control the light. A professional darkroom occupied one corner, its equipment gleaming and new. Another area held a large desk with dual monitors and specialized editing software. There was a comfortable seating area with a couch and chairs, a fully equipped kitchenette, and an entire wall of storage for equipment and supplies. But what made Charlotte gasp was the far wall, which Parker had turned into a gallery of sorts. There, professionally matted and framed, were a dozen of Charlotte's photographs, some that Parker had seen in her apartment, others that she had sent him digitally during her travels. In the center was the photo she had given him the day she left the two of them on the beach in the Hamptons. "Parker," Charlotte breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. I don't even have words. Do you like it?" Parker asked, suddenly nervous that he might have gotten something wrong. "We can change anything that's not right." In answer, Charlotte threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "It's perfect. Absolutely perfect. I can't believe you did all this." Relief and pleasure washed over Parker. "I wanted you to have a space worthy of your talent. Somewhere you could really create." Charlotte shook her head in wonder. "How did I get so lucky? To find someone who supports my work like this, who understands what it means to me." "I'm the lucky one," Parker said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "To find someone who sees the real me, not just the CEO or the billionaire. Someone who challenges me to live a fuller life." Charlotte smiled up at him, her eyes full of love. "We're both lucky then." Parker took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment he'd been waiting for. "Charlotte, there's something else I wanted to ask you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, watching as Charlotte's eyes widened in realization. Dropping to one knee on the polished concrete floor of her new studio, Parker opened the box to reveal a diamond ring, elegant, but not ostentatious, with a vintage setting that he'd thought would suit Charlotte's artistic sensibility. "Charlotte Palmer," Parker said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You've changed the way I see the world, the way I think about my life and what matters. I love your passion, your integrity, your kindness, your incredible talent. I love the way you challenge me and support me. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life loving you. Will you marry me?" Charlotte's hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling freely now. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, she just stared at him, and Parker felt a flicker of doubt. Had he misread things? Was it too soon? But then Charlotte nodded, a small movement at first that grew more emphatic as she found her voice. "Yes," she said, the word catching on a sob. "Yes, Parker Evans, I will absolutely marry you." Parker slid the ring onto her finger with hands that weren't quite steady, then stood to pull her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and relief and joy he felt. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Charlotte looked down at the ring on her finger, then back up at Parker with a radiant smile. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" "We really are," Parker confirmed, his own smile wide enough to make his cheeks ache. "Starting our life together. Right here, right now." Charlotte looked around the studio, at the space Parker had created for her, at the photographs on the wall that told the story of her career and now their relationship. "It's a pretty amazing start," she said softly. As the evening light streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over them both, Parker couldn't help but agree. It was an amazing start, and he couldn't wait to see what came next. Epilogue: 1 year later, Parker adjusted his bow tie in the mirror of the beachfront villa, ignoring Marcus's amused expression as he fussed with it for the third time. "It looks fine," Marcus said, handing Parker a glass of whiskey. "Relax. In 1 hour, you'll be married to the woman of your dreams, and no one will remember if your bow tie was slightly crooked." Parker took a deep breath, accepting the drink gratefully. "I know. I just want everything to be perfect for her." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "The weather is perfect, the setting is perfect, and Charlotte is going to think you're perfect no matter what. Now drink up. A little liquid courage never hurt anyone." Parker sipped the whiskey, feeling the warmth spread through him, calming his nerves. He still couldn't quite believe how much his life had changed in just over a year. After his proposal, things had moved quickly. Charlotte had moved in with him almost immediately, his penthouse for the time being, though they had already started looking for a home that would better reflect both of their tastes. Her studio had flourished, with the National Geographic series bringing her significant attention in the photojournalism community. Parker had made good on his promise to find more balance in his life. He still worked hard, that was part of who he was, but he no longer let Titan consume him. He made time for Charlotte, for travel, for the simple pleasures of ordinary life that he'd been missing for too long. And now, here they were in the Maldives, about to be married on a beach at sunset in front of 50 of their closest friends and family. "It's time," Marcus said, checking his watch. "Ready to get hitched?" Parker nodded, downing the last of his whiskey and setting the glass aside. "More than ready." They made their way down to the beach, where chairs had been set up facing the ocean. An arch of tropical flowers marked the spot where Parker and Charlotte would exchange vows. Guests were already seated, a mix of Parker's business associates, Charlotte's artistic friends, and both of their families. Parker took his place at the front, with Marcus beside him as best man. The small string quartet they'd hired began to play, and the guests turned expectantly toward the path leading from the villa. Danielle appeared first, as Charlotte's matron of honor, wearing a simple gown in a pale blue that complemented the tropical setting. She winked at Parker as she took her place opposite him. And then Charlotte appeared on her father's arm, and Parker forgot how to breathe. She was breathtaking in a flowing white dress that caught the breeze off the ocean, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders with small flowers woven through it. But it was her face that captivated Parker, radiant with joy, her eyes finding his immediately, a smile blooming that was just for him. As she walked toward him, time seemed to slow. Parker was vaguely aware of the guests, of the ocean behind him, of the setting sun casting everything in a golden light, all perfect details for the photographer's wedding. But mostly, he was aware of Charlotte, and the extraordinary fact that this remarkable woman had chosen to share her life with him. When she reached him, her father placed her hand in Parker's with a smile that held both blessing and warning. Parker nodded in understanding, a promise to cherish and protect the treasure being entrusted to him. "Hi," Charlotte whispered as they turned to face the officiant, her eyes dancing with happiness. "Hi yourself," Parker whispered back, squeezing her hand gently. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They had written their own vows, Parker promising to support Charlotte's dreams, to be her partner in adventure, to love her through all the chapters of their story. Charlotte vowing to remind Parker of the beauty in everyday moments, to be his refuge from the world's demands, to love him with her whole heart for all their days. As they exchanged rings, a simple platinum band for Parker, a delicate one that matched her engagement ring for Charlotte, Parker felt a sense of rightness that went bone deep. This was where he was meant to be, who he was meant to be with. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant declared as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting them in a warm, golden glow. "You may kiss the bride." Parker didn't need to be told twice. He gathered Charlotte in his arms and kissed her, pouring all his love and joy into the gesture as their guests erupted in applause. "Mrs. Evans," he murmured against her lips when they finally broke apart. "Mr. Palmer Evans," Charlotte countered with a mischievous smile, referring to the decision they'd made to combine their surnames, a symbol of their partnership in all things. Parker laughed, taking her hand as they turned to face their friends and family as a married couple. "I like the sound of that." The reception was held on the beach, with tables set up under strings of fairy lights and the stars emerging in the darkening sky. There was dinner and dancing, speeches that made them laugh and a few that made them cry. Marcus, true to form, told the story of how he'd practically forced Parker to attend Danielle's dinner party, conveniently omitting the blackmail element, but emphasizing his own role as matchmaker with gleeful exaggeration. "And so," he concluded, raising his glass to the newlyweds, "I'd like to propose a toast to Parker and Charlotte. May your life together be filled with as much joy as you've found in each other this past year. And Parker, you're welcome." Everyone laughed, including Parker, who pulled Marcus into a brief but heartfelt hug after he sat down. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything." Later, as they danced under the stars, Charlotte rested her head on Parker's shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her. "Happy?" Parker asked, his arms tightening around her waist. Charlotte lifted her head to look at him, her eyes reflecting the fairy lights strung above them. "Happier than I ever thought possible. You, complete," Parker said simply. "Like all my life was leading to you, to us." Charlotte smiled, leaning up to kiss him softly. "I can't wait to see what happens next." "Well," Parker said, a hint of excitement in his voice, "I was thinking we might start with a proper honeymoon, 3 months traveling to all the places you've told me about but I haven't seen yet. I've already arranged for Jane to handle things at Titan." Charlotte's eyes widened. 3 months? Parker, are you serious? "Completely," he assured her. "Life's too short to spend it all in an office, even a very nice one. And I want to see the world through your eyes, capture some of those moments you're always talking about." "Have I told you today that I love you?" Charlotte asked, her smile radiant. "You have," Parker said, spinning her gently under the stars, "but I'll never get tired of hearing it." As they danced, surrounded by the people they loved on a beach halfway around the world from where they'd met, Parker knew with absolute certainty that forcing him to that dinner party was the best thing Marcus had ever done for him. Because it had led him here, to this moment, to this woman, to a life fuller and richer than he had ever imagined possible. And as the night wrapped around them like a blanket of stars, Parker made a silent promise to himself and to Charlotte to never take a single moment of their life together for granted, to cherish every day of the extraordinary journey they were just beginning. In the distance, a camera flashed Danielle, capturing the moment for them. One more photograph for their story, a story that had only just begun.